Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a really significant topic, historically and culturally. The complex relationship between the Quran and the Bible.
It really is.
You've sent us a great source, these excerpts from Quran and Bible. Similarities and differences. Our goal today is basically to pull out the key takeaways, give you a kind of shortcut to being well-informed on these, hugely important texts.
It's a fascinating area. I think many people might see them as completely separate, but actually their stories and histories are, much more intertwined than you might first think. We want to unpack those connections, but also be really clear about what makes each one distinct.
Absolutely. So, let's ground ourselves first. What are we actually talking about? We've got the Bible, sacred for Christians, and parts of the Old Testament are also sacred scripture for Jews.
Right.
It's this big collection, right? The Old Testament, that's the Torah, Psalms, the prophets, and then the New Testament with the Gospels, letters, Revelation.
And then on the other hand, you have the Quran. That's the sacred text for Muslims, believed by Muslims to be the final word from God Allah given to the Prophet Muhammad.
Oh.
Revealed in Arabic over about 23 years. So you immediately see a difference. One is like a library collected over time. The other, from the Muslim view, is understood as a single, direct revelation.
That distinction in how they're viewed is itself really interesting. But here's where it gets really fascinating for me. The amount of shared stuff. The common ground.
Yeah.
You might actually be surprised how many prophets, how many stories pop up in both. We're talking Adam and Eve, Noah or Nuh, right? And the flood story.
Right, Nuh in the Quran.
Abraham or Ibrahim.
Well,
Moses, Musa dealing with Pharaoh. And importantly, Jesus or Isa. These aren't just minor mentions. They're central figures in both traditions.
Exactly. And what's really striking isn't just that they share these figures, but, how the details, the interpretations can be quite different.
Okay, tell us more about that.
Well, take Jesus, Isa. This is a really key point of divergence. In Islam, he's deeply revered, a major prophet, a messenger of God, but explicitly not God.
Right. Not divine in the Christian sense.
Precisely. And critically, the Islamic belief is that he wasn't crucified. He was raised to God. Now that contrasts sharply, obviously, with the core Christian belief in Jesus' divinity and his crucifixion being essential for salvation.
Wow. So the same name, the same historical figure, but a fundamentally different theological understanding.
Fundamentally different. Yes.
So, that's a huge difference based on a shared person. But what about the broader messages? Do they align more there?
They do, actually, quite significantly. Both texts strongly emphasize monotheism, belief in one God. That's not a small thing. It's a massive shared foundation.
Okay.
And flowing from that, both really push for moral living. Virtues like honesty, charity, kindness are stressed in both. Avoiding sin is also central.
So a shared ethical framework in many ways.
Very much so. And you also find shared concepts like heaven and hell and this idea of accountability after death, a sense of ultimate justice.
It's amazing how much common ground there is on that ethical and spiritual level.
Yeah.
But, we've mentioned differences in how they were formed, how Jesus is viewed. Let's pivot back to those distinct aspects. Mm-hmm. How does their structure differ, and what does that signal theologically?
That's a really important point. The Bible, like we touched on, it's this collection, different books, different genres, laws, history, poetry, prophecy, letters written by many authors over centuries. It feels like a library, reflecting different periods and voices within that tradition.
Right, a compilation.
Exactly.
And the Quran, how does it compare structurally?
Well, the Quran, for Muslims, is understood very differently. It's seen as one single unified book, the direct word-for-word revelation from God in Arabic.
Ah, okay. So not a collection of revelations over time, but one continuous revelation given form.
That's the understanding, yes. It's considered the literal speech of God, perfectly preserved. And this structural understanding ties into other differences we've mentioned, like the role of Jesus, Son of God versus prophet, and the belief in Muhammad as the final prophet, sealing the line of prophecy.
That's a key distinction, the finality.
Yes.
And our source also brought up something related to this idea of the Quran as the final word. The belief that it confirms, but also corrects, earlier scriptures, like the Bible. What does that mean practically?
Yeah, that's a crucial part of the Islamic perspective. The Quran is seen as confirming the original core message of monotheism that was taught by earlier prophets, including those in the Bible.
Okay, so it affirms the root message.
It affirms the root message, yes. But it's also believed to clarify things and in some instances correct points where, from the Muslim perspective, the original message might have been altered or misinterpreted over time in those earlier texts.
But human changes might have crept in, is the idea.
That's the belief that distortions or additions might have occurred in previous scriptures. So the Quran is seen as the final, perfectly preserved, and therefore authoritative version of God's message, sort of restoring and completing it.
Okay, that makes sense within that framework.
Yeah.
So if we try to pull all these threads together,
Yeah.
what's the big picture here? They seem incredibly linked, yet also quite distinct.
That's exactly it. It's not one or the other. They are deeply interconnected. Shared prophets, shared stories, shared moral foundations like monotheism. But they are also clearly different in crucial interpretations, core theology, especially around Jesus, their structure, and how they understand Revelation itself.
It's a both-hand situation, not either.
Precisely. Both related and distinct.
And the reason we're doing this deep dive, the why, for you, our listener, is really about understanding these connections, these differences. It helps build, respect, interfaith understanding.
Yeah, it moves beyond stereotypes.
Right. You can recognize the common values, the shared heritage, while still respecting the very real theological differences.
And just practically understanding this relationship helps you appreciate the huge historical and cultural impact these texts have had. I mean, they've shaped civilizations, laws, art, philosophy, countless lives for centuries.
Knowing how they relate, or don't, gives you a much richer view of history itself.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the core of your sources today, really unpacking the deep similarities and the critical differences between the Quran and the Bible. You should now have a much stronger foundation for understanding how these two globally vital texts relate to each other.
And hopefully this deep dive shows that knowing about these connections isn't just, an academic exercise. It's a tool for building respect, for fostering dialogue, and for seeing the common ground that can sometimes be hidden beneath what look like huge divides.
Definitely food for thought.
And as you think about all this, maybe here's one final thought to mull over. Given the immense ongoing impact of both the Quran and the Bible, historically and culturally, how could a better grasp of their shared stories, alongside their distinct interpretations, maybe open up new ways for dialogue, perhaps even reconciliation, in our complex world today, even for people who don't follow either faith?